Time for round 3. Peggy McIntosh's white privilege versus evidence and common sense. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing her name at this point, but stick with me. I'm doing this for good reason. Near as I can tell, few if any have ever addressed this entire list, even though it's the foundation on which all of this social justice bullshit is built. We've yet to pull out this bottom brick from their argument, and I think it's time that we finally do so. And on that note, I apologize for the rampant swearing in this video to those of you who have been known to complain about such things, but you can chalk it up to my mounting frustration. Alright, let's dive in.
I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group.
Wow. We got off to a running start with this one. Are you fucking kidding me right now? You are constantly asked to speak for all the people of your racial group. That's how you make your living, Peggy. That's the only thing anyone wants to hear out of your mouth anytime your face is on screen. See, this is why we call you people NPCs. You have zero self-awareness and absolutely no autonomous thought. You're fucking robots who just regurgitate scripted buzzwords and want everything done for you. In this day and age, Peggy, every white person is expected to speak for their race every time any white person of notable reputation, especially a straight white male, fucks up in some capacity. Or even if they don't, and the left just arbitrarily decides that they don't like that person for some reason. Every white person is expected to virtue signal, apologize, check their privilege, and police the speech of other white people. And it's all due to the bigoted teachings of people who subscribe to your nonsense.
I can remain oblivious to the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion.
Really? You're really trying to attribute a white person's unilingual status to systemic racism? Let me ask you a question, Peggy. How many black people in this country do you think know, I don't know, Swahili or the customs of Kenya? How many people in China do you think even speak English or any language beyond either Mandarin or Cantonese? Because last I checked, it was fewer than 1%. And how many in that 1% do you think speak any other white language? Spanish, French, Italian, German, Dutch? Let alone any of the customs that come with them. Hell, how many of them do you think even speak Japanese? And where's the cultural penalty for their ignorance of any of these things? Newsflash, Peggy, the majority Chinese East and the majority white European West have many shocking cultural differences, and culture shock goes both ways. If you think you could pluck a random person from rural China, drop them in the middle of Times Square, and they'd be able to seamlessly adapt from their first step on American soil, you are out of your fucking mind. The only difference is that a Chinese immigrant here can count on your entire political wing's victim narrative to garner sympathy, while a white immigrant in China can expect no such courtesy. As a matter of fact, depending on where they are, they can likely expect to be called guaylo and spat on every day of their fucking lives.
I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider.
Peggy, people of color have been criticizing the government's behavior and policies for decades now, and you were in the thick of it even as you wrote this paper. Forgiving your dismissal of the white people who marched right beside them for their cultural inclusion, how the hell do you think the civil rights movement marched its way to victory, you lunatic? The white people of this country, by and large, do not isolate people of color as cultural outsiders, nor does the government. They do this to themselves. Every time they open their mouths to complain about the white man, they paint themselves as outsiders. What white person could possibly consider themselves part of a group that insists on standing on the other side of a fence they erected themselves to be away from white people? Well, it would seem that the only white people capable of this are those willing to hate their own skin color on behalf of people of color. People like you, like these two lunatics who think they can simply identify as black, and like these pathetic clowns morally subsidizing black entitlement by wearing slave bondage and apologizing for actions of which they themselves were never guilty. And for the record, Peggy, white people and people of color very much are capable of being comrades and friends on every level. I've seen and been a part of many close friendships including members of all races. And do you know what I haven't seen in any of them? The constant finger-wagging and moral shaming booming from your side of the political fence that inevitably breeds resentment and destroys those friendships. When it doesn't occur to either person in that kind of friendship to hold a grudge against the other based on the color of their skin, we suddenly start seeing the formation of a healthy social net. You people are the ones keeping that racial divide alive.
I can be reasonably sure that if I ask to talk to the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my race.
Yeah, and you can be reasonably sure that any random person you talk to will be of your race. You live in a majority white country, Peggy. Over 83% of the country was white when you wrote this paper, as opposed to the 76.9% of today. 61.3% if we're discounting Hispanic and Latino. A decline which is loudly celebrated by hateful and ideologically brainwashed people of color that you support.
In 1960, whites were 90% of the country. The Census Bureau recently estimated that whites already account for less than 2/3 of the population and will be a minority by 2050. Other estimates put that day much sooner. One may assume the new majority will not be such compassionate overlords as the white majority has been.
I think it was illustrated when you read that quote. When you got to, whites will be a minority, I heard the audience cheer. Can you imagine an audience of white people cheering? Oh, it's going to be all white. No, you cannot.
How exactly is this a privilege, Peggy? Does it comfort you? Would you actually be enough of a racist piece of shit to feel relief that the person in charge is white like you? Would you be racist enough to assume that their being of any other race would spell trouble for you because you think they're going to treat you like less of a human being for the color of your skin? Not only is all of this indicative of your own racism, but it's pretty much a self-fulfilling prophecy now that you actively seek to omit white faces and roles of authority in order to reduce white privilege. I'll tell you right now, I've never liked Ann Coulter. Irrespective of Cenk Uygur's inflammatory idiocy on that stage, I find her to be a rhetorical buffoon at the very least, illustrated in her tactless and mischaracterizing use of the word overlords. But poor word choice and thinly veiled racial bias aside, in this case, she makes a valid point. Not only have you encouraged these thoughts in non-white people, but once they're elevated to the roles of authority you desire for them, you've assured that every one of those non-white people who listen to you absolutely will treat every white person beneath them like shit, because you've filled them with enough resentment for the inclination to do so. We were finally getting close to a time of harmony between the races. Within a few generations from when you wrote this garbage paper, we might have finally arrived at a time when race would no longer facilitate tribalistic division if we could just keep the children from being taught otherwise as often as possible. What you've done is pass the racist entitlement ball into the court of people of color and ensured that this toxic fucking cycle continues ad infinitum in a time when it should be losing momentum. This is your fault.
If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race.
Can you? How can you be sure of that? Because that same mechanism, whatever it is, would grant people of color the same certainty in one direction or another. The fact is that you can't be sure of that, Peggy. At all. You just assume that's the case because the people judging you in this way are most often going to be white. And by that same reasoning, you are assuming that those same white people will always judge people of color differently from you because you believe all white people are as racist as you are. Racist enough for their racial bias to overrule their common sense and put their careers in jeopardy. That's all this is, an assumption. An assumption rooted in racist projection that you are not justified in making in the least, and that would constitute a libelous and legally actionable slap in the face to any specific person you were apparently just smart enough not to name. The race card is not a burden, Peggy. It is a privilege, a weapon, and an excuse to not be held accountable for one's own actions.
I can easily buy posters, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children's magazines featuring people of my race.
These are posters of black media sensations from 1988. These are black postcards from 1988. These are black picture books from 1964, 1973, 1975, and 1988. These are black dolls from 1951, 1965, 1971, and 1984. They weren't hard to find now, and I expect they were even easier to find then. Even if you didn't find them in the first store you walked into, I somehow doubt it would have been difficult to locate them elsewhere, or at least order them if you knew how to use a fucking telephone. Aside from the introduction of a black G.I. Joe doll in 1973, a black Barbie in 1980, and their celebrated presence in both lines ever since, not to mention the black action figures of the Marvel canon from the early 90s until now, this is Sunman, made in 1985 by a toy company called Olmec Toys, which marketed itself specifically as a black alternative to every action figure with a white face, a marketing tactic aimed at resentful, racist black people. Most greeting cards are racially ambiguous and difficult to date, but Hallmark has a history of releasing African American greeting cards as early as 1962 and officially released their Mahogany line in 1987. Since then, there has been an explosion of black greeting card companies and independent makers appealing specifically to black people who can't stand to see white faces on their cards. As for black children's magazines, everyone knows the long and celebrated history of Ebony magazine, introduced in 1945. But given when you wrote this nonsense, you should have been aware of Ebony Jr., which ran from 1973 to 1985 and was resurrected online in 2007. Never mind the fact that any quote-unquote white children's magazine, then or now, was never exclusive to white children. Any magazine to present itself as such would have been pulled from shelves without question, assuming it ever actually made it to the shelves in the first place. All of these things, every last one of them, were created because so many black people insist on seeing themselves as others to the white race, and who believe every creation with a white face on it is somehow an affront to black people. And because of white guilt-carrying closet racists like you, this market has expanded dramatically ever since. Now we have black magazines dedicated to images of black wealth and prosperity, black movies depicting struggles of black people in quote-unquote white society, a history of black music pandering to black victimhood and insane visions of black idealism, black authors with an open grudge against white people, black fiction glorifying thug culture, black nonfiction highlighting white shame of the past and justifying black self-segregation of the present, and company after company providing black exclusive media to anyone who feels even remotely marginalized. In short, Peggy, you're full of shit.
I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in, rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared.
Feeling isolated, feeling out of place, feeling outnumbered, feeling unheard, held at a distance, or feared. It's all about feelings with you people. I feel isolated, so you're oppressing me because I say so. Tell me, Peggy, since you've written this paper, have you seen any organization, let alone organizations you would associate with, deliberately and openly isolate or silence any person of color on the basis of their race? I'm willing to bet that you haven't, because even if they are the racist tyrants you like to think that they are, even if they are gnashing their teeth over race all day, all of them would know that it would sink their respective organizations to do so. The only feeling you listed that rings even remotely true is that of being feared. And frankly, I think any organization or individual white person is perfectly justified in fearing people of color in a professional context nowadays. If we lived in a truly egalitarian society wherein everyone's successes, failures, shortcomings, beliefs, and actions were judged as his or her own, and not representative of his or her race, they'd have nothing to fear. But that's not the society we live in. We live in a society that covets victim points over personal accountability, and as such, a person of color in a mostly white organization makes being part of that organization like walking through a minefield. Every word every white person speaks, every action they take, has to be done with extreme care, because the moment that person, a person of color society already sees as a victim, feels slighted on behalf of any one of their demographics, for any reason, even if they aren't, that's when careers and reputations are destroyed. The same cannot be said of a white person in any organization, whether they're the only one of their race or not. Try joining up with Uhuru, Peggy. They'd absolutely love to have another toilet seat complexioned individual in their ranks to berate and abuse. And rest assured, they will do just that. You'll feel more isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, and held at a distance than you ever have in your entire life. But they won't fear you in the least, because they know that no matter how much abuse they lob your way, no matter what they do to you, you have absolutely no recourse for restitution. No one will see you as a victim. At best, they'll see you as an idiot for putting yourself in that position.
I can be pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize her chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine.
No, you can't, Peggy. You couldn't then, and you damn sure can't now. Companies that survive long enough to provide you a series of advancement opportunities only care about two things: results and their bottom line. Forgiving the fact that any management personnel worth their salt won't entertain either side of an argument if it isn't conducive to the best interests of the company, when either of those factors start showing a decline, you can be pretty sure that executives higher up the chain of command will find the leak and plug it. And when they do, the career of the person responsible will already be on thin ice if they don't improve their metrics. And if it's discovered that this person is making bad decisions based on the race of his or her subordinates, that person can expect immediate termination as a PR liability. This holds true now more than ever, because now that more and more companies are choosing to get woke with little concern of going broke, they are drowning their standards of professional etiquette in identity politics. Now, all a person of color you're at odds with needs to do to shut you up is accuse you of white-splaining, in lieu of the additional mansplaining by privilege of your vagina. And you can be pretty sure that your superiors will concur. Just ask James Damore, the engineer that Google decided to terminate because he dared to voice his opinion about the inclusion of ideological diversity and non-discriminatory methods of increasing the female presence in tech.
I can be fairly sure that if I argue for the promotion of a person of another race or a program centering on race, this is not likely to cost me heavily within my present setting, even if my colleagues disagree with me.
Wow. Your stupidity actually makes me dizzy, Peggy. It's like watching a dog chase its own tail, but nowhere near as amusing. So let me get this straight. You believe that white guilt is a privilege? You believe it's a privilege that white people, and only white people, will stifle their objections and fold under the pressure of allegations concerning their racial tolerance? This isn't white privilege, Peggy. If it's a privilege at all, it's a privilege held by left-leaning moral authoritarians like you. Because any white person who disagrees with you, as admitted in this very sentence, can expect their colleagues to ignore, steamroll, and potentially threaten them for voicing that disagreement. To do otherwise, then or now, would be to put themselves in the crosshairs of the PC police patrolling every institution of notable repute. I know I'll never see it in my lifetime, let alone yours, but I would love to see a black person propose the advancement of any white person before a majority black organization. Because when that black person is tarred and feathered for even making the suggestion, I would absolutely relish the chance to watch your brain crash and reboot as you realize that they are, in fact, the victims of their own regressive standards of racial loyalty, just as we've been telling you all along.
If I declare there is a racial issue at hand, or there isn't a racial issue at hand, my race will lend me more credibility for either position than a person of color will have.
Jesus. You give me a fucking headache, you know that? I cannot imagine who actually read through these points and still thought that they had even a shred of merit. Forgetting the fact that every last one of your claims has been completely baseless, do you realize exactly how many times you've tried to make this same bullshit argument in this paper? So far, bullet points number 9, 10, 11, 19, 22, 23, 27, 28, 29, and now number 30 can easily be reworded in the exact same way. Everyone listens to white people and nobody listens to brown people. And it's nonsense no matter how many times you fucking say it. Your claim contradicts itself, Peggy. If only white people are listened to, and only white people have social or political sway, then racial grievances against white people and activism in favor of brown people should consistently fall flat regardless of whether they're spoken from white or brown lips. Because it would mean that there is absolutely no white empathy or sympathy for non-white people. Large chunks of our history as a nation would have never happened. There would be no non-white people in roles of authority, non-white celebrities, or non-white wealthy people. There would be no NAACP, no affirmative action, no Black History Month, no racial scholarships extended to non-white people, let alone excluding white people there too. There would be no publications for the promotion of non-white people to publish this bullshit paper of yours, and you yourself would have never even seen the need for such a thing. Not even Jim Crow laws would have happened because black people would have never been freed from slavery in the first place. Every time you make this claim, you spit in the face of your predecessors who strove for civil rights and racial equality. You dismiss every victory they ever achieved because you espouse that white people at large have never desired racial harmony. You refuse to see progress, and you shoulder every white person with your own racist guilt. People like you are the reason nothing gets better, because every time you say this shit, you make sure that resentment is alive and well on both sides of the fence that you built.
I can choose to ignore developments in minority writing and minority activist programs or disparage them or learn from them, but in any case, I can find ways to be more or less protected from negative consequences of any of these choices.
Another everyone listens to white people, no one listens to brown people. What a surprise. You know, I really have to wonder just how much reflection you've done since you've written this paper, and whether or not you've revisited it since. Because as certain as I am that it would have been effortless to prove you wrong in 1988, I'm not just combing through it to demonstrate how stupid it was from its conception. I'm doing it so I can demonstrate just how absurd it has become. And thus far, there is no point on this list more ridiculous than this one. If you learn from this social justice horseshit, you can expect to apologize for the color of your skin every day for the rest of your life, or until you decide to identify as a different race. And you can expect your opinion to fall on deaf ears until every other member of every other race has had their chance to tell you why your opinion doesn't matter. If you ignore it, as increasingly difficult as that's become in this day and age, you can expect the devaluing and villainization of your race to creep into every part of your life until you can't ignore it anymore. Every magazine you read, every news channel you watch, every show you used to enjoy, every video game you play, every social media platform you use, every class you take, every job you hold. And even if you manage to ignore all of that, don't worry, because even if they can't get to you, they can damn sure get to your children. Good luck ignoring it when your 10-year-old son comes home from school claiming to be genderqueer and privileged. And if you disparage them, well, you better do it quietly, because once they get a hold of your information, you can expect to be terminated from whatever job you hold, expelled from whatever school you attend, smeared on whatever social media you use, disowned by many of the people you know, and shamed by most of the people you don't know. In addition to having to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Because remember, punching Nazis is a good thing. And that's if you're just an average Joe. If you're lucky enough to have attained any kind of fame or higher status, you can expect to be destroyed socially, professionally, and financially. Please tell me what you would do to protect yourself from any of this, Peggy. I'd love to hear it.
My culture gives me little fear about ignoring the perspectives and powers of people of other races.
I refer you to my last two responses, Peggy. This isn't a new point, and I'm not going to address it as such. It's the 12th time you've decided to beat a dead horse. Everyone listens to white people, and nobody listens to brown people.
I am not made acutely aware that my shape, bearing, or body odor will be taken as a reflection on my race.
Right, because making fun of the way white people supposedly look, dress, walk, talk, think, and behave hasn't been a staple of black comedy for the past 50 fucking years. And let's not forget the fact that white people are the only race who aren't impervious to criticism, and the only race forbidden from criticizing anyone. When was the last time you saw any non-white person fired and publicly shamed for making a physical observation about white people in any capacity, positive or otherwise, because it's offensive to white people? For fuck's sake. You know, you would think it would be simple to correct someone who is so fundamentally wrong about everything, but it really isn't. How the fuck do you structure a retort to someone who not only says that the sky is purple, but who has formed a goddamn religion around it? It's no wonder no one else has decided to tackle this entire list, because it's like climbing a fucking mountain. You never expect to run into stupidity and stubbornness this unassailable, but once you do, it's the stuff of ulcers. That's alright though, because I can see the end on the horizon now. Just 13 more of these stupid privileges before I can wash my hands of this moron. Stay tuned for the finale. I'm gonna go eat a fistful of antacids and take a nap. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what you saw here, have a look at my other videos and leave me your thoughts in the comments. If you support my message, then please like, favorite, and subscribe. If you'd like to help this channel improve, you can reach out to me on Twitter or on Facebook with any suggestions. And if you'd like to support me more directly, please consider following me on Patreon. Links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll catch you all in my next video.